Welcome everyone to DynamicsCon, and let's jump into my session today. So what I'm going to be talking about today is you might not need Dynamics CRM, but you might need a Power App. Just a very quick intro for myself. My name is Nick Doelman. I am a Power Platform Dynamics 365 specialist. I've been awarded the Microsoft MVP in Business Applications for the 4th time just recently. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm presenting to you today from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and definitely there's my social links. Reach out to me, check out my blog. If you want to have questions later, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, but mention that you've seen my session on DynamicsCon. I do get a lot of invitations, so I really want to make sure where people are coming from, where their questions are coming from in context. But enough about me. Let's talk a little bit more about Dynamics CRM and Power Apps. So here's the agenda that we're going to be covering today. The first thing is, before I can really talk about whether you use a Power App or Dynamics CRM or that whole story around that, we're going to talk about the amazing origin story of the Power Platform. Just by understanding a little bit of that history is probably will answer some questions and some of the questions that maybe your customers or your team might run into. From that, we're going to help your business decide either to choose, build, or steal a business application, hopefully using the Power Platform. And we'll talk more about that. And then finally, we're going to wrap that up. We're going to today, in the time that we have, from scratch, we're going to build a CRM style Power App. And we're going to do this all within the session, and you're going to be able to do it yourself and do it before your next meeting. So if your boss is bugging you to get a CRM system, we're going to show you how to build one yourself very quickly using the Power Platform. So we're going to move in a little bit to the history here, and very much like a comic book, it's got its heroes, its villains, its history. And we're going to talk about the different things and how we came from CRM and we got to the Power Platform and how all these things tie together. So let's start in the beginning. We're going to go back to the year 2002 and 2003. And Microsoft released this piece of software called Microsoft Business Solutions Customer Relationship Management version 1. So definitely a bit of a mouthful, and it was a pretty interesting at the time. If you remember back to 2002, a lot of times software was, of course, installed on servers, and you needed a client installed on a workstation, and you would walk around with your floppy disks or install from the network. But CRM at the time, it was browser-based. It ran in Internet Explorer. It was completely browser-based. And at the time, that was completely new. No one else was really doing that. And the other thing about it too, it had a business application layer. So it was the backend was Microsoft SQL as its database, but it had that business application layer. And we're going to talk a little bit more of what that really means. But it had a few other features as well. It started with a sales module, a service module, and eventually in version 3, they also added a marketing module. And it was a pretty cool system. It was version 1, so it had its quirks, but it was really the kind of evolution of something new. It was also, here's a fun fact for a pub quiz, it was one of the first products Microsoft released that was written completely in .NET. So remember that one. A few years later, Microsoft released something called CRM Live, which became Dynamics CRM Online. Now, this is also pretty revolutionary at the time. Now, there was other software vendors doing this, and we'll mention one a little bit later. But what's neat about this is if you wanted to run CRM, you didn't have to install it on your own servers or buy hardware or do a lot of that infrastructure stuff. It was completely subscription-based. So from your licensing, you didn't have to buy these full enterprise licenses. You would just grab your credit card, swipe, and then you would have a fully fledged version of Microsoft Dynamics CRM. And it was completely cloud-based, and it was really quite revolutionary. And it was really pretty much the exact same as the version you would install on premise. So a lot of that work you've done on premise, your customizations, your configurations, your data, it would work exactly the same in the cloud. Now, around that time, and I started working with CRM in version 1 back in 2002, 2003, that era. And we're doing regular CRM implementations like, yes, here how you can track your sales or how you can do your customer service. But a lot of companies are saying, well, we don't really do customer service type work the same as everyone else, or we don't really do sales the same as everywhere else. A lot of nonprofits, a lot of other organizations. What we really need is some business applications. And the CRM platform was great for that. And we have this concept called XRM. And XRM set meant anything relationship management. So if you needed to build a custom system, maybe to track donations, maybe to track your membership. I even did projects for things called reinsurance and also a car auction site. Those types of things needed some specialized features that you couldn't just buy off-the-shelf software for. So yes, we could have built software from the ground up using, Visual Studio or Visual Basic and some of those other things. But CRM had a lot of this stuff, plus the ability to create custom entities and create your own workflows. It had a whole series of features of that foundation for building software applications that just wasn't there before. So we already were doing these types of things. If we were building from ground up, would have taken weeks or months to build. Or what we could do is we could install Dynamics CRM and then create our own custom entities and mold that to our own business. And Microsoft kind of realized they had something special on their hands. They realized they had more than just a CRM system. They began to buy into this XRM concept as well. And if you remember, you can still search on YouTube. You can find the actual video and it still exists. And it's pretty interesting. I'm not going to play the video for you today, but it would start out with, customer management, meaning, CRM, that is something you would use a CRM system for. But then the screen would dissolve into something like cow management, and then clown management, and asset management, franchise management, and employee management. And they went through approximately 40 different scenarios where you could take Dynamics CRM and build all of these special unique line of business applications that you would not be able to go and buy off the shelf. And that was pretty exciting. And they basically called this the XRM, the one platform, many applications, and the YouTube video dissolved out into an infinite possibilities. So this was pretty exciting at the time. And, Dynamics CRM and a lot of the projects that I personally worked on weren't actually true CRM, but they were actually business applications. Now, part of this history, if we look in the, middle of the 2010s, there's a little bit of renaming, and I don't want to shock anybody, but every so often Microsoft likes to rename their products or rebrand their products. Not very often they do that, but it does happen. So what happened was Dynamics CRM became Dynamics 365. So we had the Dynamics CRM that we know and love, and it was announced that it was now going to be known as Dynamics 365. Of course, we've heard of things like Office 365 and Microsoft 365. So it kind of aligned to Microsoft's greater vision and beginning to merge all of their business applications together. But the question comes up, what exactly is Dynamics 365? So for sure, we think when, I think of Dynamics 365, I think of Microsoft Dynamics CRM. And I know a lot of you out there who are probably watching this, your customers still call it CRM. You probably still call it CRM. I know a lot of people in the industry, they're like, no, I'm going to call it CRM to the end of days. Well, it's true, but Dynamics 365 is more than just CRM. It also has things like finance and operations, which we now know is supply chain management. It was also Business Central, plus a whole other bunch of apps keep getting added, like talent, like HR, manufacturing, retail. So Dynamics 365 is actually a collection of business applications that serve specific needs. Now, what's interesting in the history of all this is Dynamics 365, and it's been going strong for years. But what happened at Microsoft, on the other side of campus, there was a completely different group building some new technology. And what happened was they were following this new trend, and it was called a no-code, low-code movement, where you're beginning to build applications. And also another group was working on some data analytic tools. And these are the things that came out from that. So something such as Power BI, where you could take in data from a bunch of different sources and you would begin to build dashboards, reports, and all sorts of different data analytic tools to present your data. And you know what? You could pull from Dynamics 365. That was fine, but it was really kind of a separate movement there. We had Microsoft Flow. Microsoft Flow was this workflow engine that was able to automate and do a lot of the work from Office 365. For those of you who may be working in SharePoint, it replaced that workflow engine, and it could automate a lot of things, and not just for particular applications, but communicate across applications. And then there was also something called Project Sienna, which became the original Power Apps, which were Canvas-based apps, where you could build applications like software applications using drag and drop techniques. And you could run that on a mobile, on a tablet, on your workstation, and begin to have that pixel perfect controls and everything like that. So those three pieces of technology were pretty exciting at the time for a lot of people. So we had Power Apps, Flow, and of course the Common Data Service, which when we're talking about Common Data Service version 1 was sort of their database. And you had a lot of these same features, such as data entity relationships. There's multi-user, it's web-based, there's security, user interface, all those things. Now, if you're reading this slide, and you probably realize, wait a minute, Nick, did you do a duplicate of that slide? And I kind of did, because if you remember, Microsoft Dynamics CRM also had all of these features. So I wasn't there, I don't know, but I can only think that there was an all hands meeting, and of course they're showing off their new technology from Power Apps and Flow and all these things. And the Dynamics 365 guys were probably sitting in the back of the room, probably looking at this and thinking, you know what, all of this stuff is cool, but we have all this stuff already. It's all in Dynamics 365. We have our database, we have our workflow engine, we have the ability to create apps. They run on different platforms. So I don't think it was kind of one of those moments. And of course, Microsoft's a big company, and of course now they had these two streams of technology. So what was it going to be some sort of big knife fight, some big challenge of villain versus hero? Which was which? Is it going to be Power Apps, Flow, Power BI versus Dynamics 365? Or Microsoft going to be competing against each other? No, of course not. Because all of these particular technologies had great features. And because a lot of this was built on the Azure cloud with .NET technologies, it was able to merge together. It was a perfect combination. And this is what created the Power Platform. And it was great. So from the Dynamics CRM world, we had a powerful, was much better, it was a proven, it was the CRM database had that business application layer to SQL. Well, that became the new Common Data Service. It's been there, it was robust. Also, in terms of Power Apps, you take that CRM forms and views, and that became model-driven Power Apps. Of course, Dynamics CRM and integrated with Office 365, Exchange, Outlook, SharePoint. It also had a portal capabilities. And even with that, it wasn't just from the ground up Power Apps. They also had horizontal applications. Of course, we know sales, service, finance, manufacturing, and all those Dynamics 365 apps. Now, from the Power App side, it was pretty exciting because with the Canvas apps, you're able to create pixel perfect, mobile ready user interfaces using the Canvas apps and be able to tie those into the Common Data Service. We also had that enterprise grade workflow. And don't get me wrong, I love the Dynamics CRM workflow engine. But when you start to work with Flow, it of course got renamed to Power Automate. And like I said, Microsoft every so often will rename things. I could do so much more with my projects. I could begin to interact with other systems. I could do things that I would have to do some custom coding and workflow. It was really great. And there was hundreds of connectors. So I wasn't just pigeonholed and talking to my CRM database or what became the Common Data Service. If I needed to talk to other systems, we could use the existing connectors, or we could begin to create our own custom connectors. And like I have a timesheet application, which I actually have created a custom connector for, and it ties into my Dynamics 365 system, and it works perfectly. It's great. And of course, with Power BI being that dashboarding and reporting tool, it could pull data from all aspects of the Power Platform and display that data for our business users. And this was great. Like the technology was amazing, was all glued together, and it's continually evolving. So you've probably seen this screen. It's actually from Microsoft, and we see that the Power Platform, it's evolving as well. So not only do we have our Power Apps and Power BI and Power Automate, Microsoft has added things like Power Virtual Agents, which are effectively, drag and drop chatbots. And it's amazing. You can create these little chatbots and put them on your website. There's other things like the AI builder. So imagine using artificial intelligence to go through and do like image recognition or text classification and all of these things. Like, to me, artificial intelligence and AI was always something for data scientists, but with the Power Platform and those tools, you can actually use AI in your day-to-day projects. So I'm not going to talk so much about like AI and Power Virtual Agents and things like that, but all of this really cool technology is kind of taken away from the roots of the Dynamics CRM. So I'm going to tell you a very interesting story. So this is actually, it's a true story, and it happened a couple months ago. And I was working with a client who had a lot of legacy applications using like on-premise SharePoint servers. And they realized, okay, not only do we need to upgrade some of these applications, but we also have a whole bunch of other apps. We're storing things in Excel and a bunch of other things. And, our users need specific things. So they are saying, we're a Microsoft shop. What can we use? And of course, they started investigating the Power Platform. They took App in a Day. They got really excited about it. So I was helping them out to go a little bit further, coaching them. We did a Power Platform Bootcamp. We talked about Power Automate, portals, Canvas apps, model apps, the common data service, a whole bunch of different things. And I was giving the presentation. I had a group of people in the room, well, virtual room. We are 2020, so this was all done on Teams. But effectively, it sort of went like this. I talked about the Power Platform, and they were getting excited. They were thinking of all these applications they could build, how they could, take their organization to the next level using these tools to build applications. But then here's the interesting thing. One of the project managers, she said, I have a question. And of course, I'm open to answering questions. And she said, can the Power Platform integrate with CRM systems such as Salesforce? Now, nothing against Salesforce. Salesforce is a well-known CRM system out there, but it was interesting and made me realize that Microsoft has evolved its technology that sometimes you sort of forget your roots with that. So I kind of was surprised, and I'm kind of sitting there and I'm like, sure, we can, because yes, there are connectors to Salesforce, but why are you asking this question? I find that, very curious. So here's sort of the storyboard of what happened. This project manager, she said, oh, by the way, I'm on a committee and we're trying to decide a new CRM system. We've been looking at Salesforce. We've been looking at a few others, and whatever we build, it's really going to, we want it to integrate with what we're building on the Power Platform. So of course, I didn't tell them that history like I told you guys about where, Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform came from. So I kind of, told the story. I said, do you realize the Power Platform is actually based on Dynamics CRM? That's where it came from. And it was a really great kind of vibe because, they were getting excited, really, okay, then how do we get this Dynamics CRM into our Power Platform? And I basically said, and I thought about it a little bit further, because this organization, they're not traditional. They're a government funded organization. That's where they get their funding. They do a lot of projects. And of course, a lot of these apps we're building, you can't just buy off the shelf to fit what they're doing. So we're going to build Power Apps. But I realized they don't do some of those traditional CRM things. So I said, do you manage sales? And she's like, no. And I said, what about support cases, service level agreements, any of that customer service stuff? Like you don't, do kind of tickets or anything like that? No, it doesn't do that either. So then basically, and then she kind of said, well, here's what we do want it for. We kind of want a centralized system with all our contacts, all our partners that we work with. And we also want to be able to link that into what projects they're working on, what initiatives and things like that. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. So I kind of said, you know what? You could start with a Power App. You don't need a full CRM system. And it's running on the common data service, and it still has those CRM capabilities sort of built right in. And here's the best part, because they're already looking at the Power Platform and building apps, they had the licensing already. They didn't need to go out and buy new licenses for a CRM system. So that was pretty exciting. And that project is evolving. Basically, we are building things like Canvas apps for their people that are on the road to collect information. On the back end, we were creating some model-driven apps so they can kind of analyze and organize this and do some scheduling. We are looking at something like portals for their partners to be able to log in and update that information. And of course, a lot of that automation is now being driven using Power Automate and creating flows to do alerts and do some other processing. So it's exciting time for them, because they're going through a full digital transformation of their business using some of these new cloud-based tools. So that made me think, it made me kind of pause a little bit and think, okay, how are they choosing business applications? Now, I know some of you who are watching, you might be working for a Microsoft partner, you might be consultants, you might be, internally a business analyst, and your own business is trying to figure out, trying to navigate your path in terms of building business apps. And hopefully this will help you out a little bit. So basically, how do businesses choose business apps? Well, they sometimes buy something. They might build something. But there's those two options, but here's a third one. And this one usually wins out all the time. They'll use what's available. So stuff like Excel or Microsoft Access or other things like that. So this is where we need to actually kind of drill down a little bit in some of the dangers like that. Of course, internally, if you're trying to sell this to your own stakeholders, we can kind of say why that could be dangerous. So let's first talk about a little bit about the buying something. So there's standard practices, things like accounting, ERP systems, and that works really well, because whether you're running a lemonade stand or you're running a multi-million-dollar corporation, you're going to do debits and credits. You're going to need a balance sheet. You're going to need to, run invoices and things like that. So a lot of this software that exists will work perfectly, a bit of configuration, and away you go. There could be other industry verticals out there. It could be a learning management system, a membership management system. But at the end of the day, even with some of these systems, they might not always align exactly with the businesses. There might be some processes you might need to change that software, or you might change your own business processes to align with that software. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying something, because we're going to take a look a little bit later at what Dynamics 365 offers, including some of the accelerators. So you might actually have a fit there, but we'll talk a little bit more about how that Power Platform fits in as well. Now, another common thing, and you'll see this every so often, is someone will build something. They are going to get a developer in, and they're going to build the whole business system from ground up. And this has its benefits. You can match the business processes exactly. You can modify, you can grow that as your business changes. But what we find, though, is what I've seen, this gets pretty expensive. The developer has to build all that foundation, the security level, the database level. Is it going to be in the cloud? Is it going to be on on-premise services? What are the upgrade issues? How are we going to integrate? If we have other systems that need to talk to it, you need to develop those integrations as well. At the end of the day, who owns that source code? Is it the developer that developed it, or is it you, your own company? And who owns that system? And what happens when you need it fixed? That developer, could disappear to the backwoods of Alaska, and you're kind of stuck. Or they could have the source code, or someone could, be saying, well, we own the source code. If you want it fixed, we're going to charge you a lot more. So this building something custom really makes a lot of businesses pretty nervous, and rightly so, because there's a lot of investment and a lot of trust that happens there. And for that reason, we get into the familiar. And how many people out there, you probably see this every day in your own company, in your customers, you'll use something familiar like Excel. Why? Because, we need to start tracking something. Well, let's just create an Excel sheet. It's the easiest thing. To be quite honest, I even do that sometimes. If I need to track something, I'll just open up Excel and just start listing all the things. Why? It's fast, it's familiar, it's easy, anybody can do it. But then we get getting into other problems. It's not really efficient. If you're storing millions and millions of rows of data in an Excel sheet and trying to scroll down and find stuff, it's probably not the best way to do it. Is it secure as well? because anybody can open that sheet and see all those different bits of data, maybe, some of those other worksheets and things like that. In terms of scaling, if you have multiple people that need access to that sheet, like how many of you work with a sheet where suddenly someone else needs to edit it and you need to send an email around to say, oh, we need to edit the worksheet. Can you open it up for us? And all those types of things. And then they're also running into things like compliance issues. Is that data being protected properly? Is it compliant? Could you, if you're in the European Union, or you're running into GDPR issues with your Excel sheet. So there's a whole bunch of issues with Excel. And like I said, this is probably the most popular thing. And I also know that trying to sometimes, suggest building a Power App or modifying Dynamics CRM or Dynamics 365, a lot of times people are like, we're just going to stick with Excel. Well, and I'm sure you run this into your own business situations as well. So I'm going to tell you a couple scary stories, and maybe you could retell stories like this, and maybe you have some of your own to help convince why you do need a proper business system. So, scary stories. So I'm currently working with an organization that originally had a contract with part of the federal government to distribute, working with the federal government to distribute student loans, student employment subsidies. So this company had this pool of money. You needed to apply for the subsidy, and then they would, make sure your application, and that would go to the company for the purposes of employing students. For those of you in Canada, it's not the one that's in the news right now. It's a completely different program. It's all legit, no worries. But this was the program they were, mandated to manage. So how did they decide they're going to manage that? Well, of course, good old Excel. So what they did was they started to list all their placements in an Excel sheet, all the companies that had applied for the subsidy, what the status was, the dates and all that. And you know what? It kind of worked. But again, they're running into who's working on the one sheet. Is there a copy of this sheet? Is this a copy or is this the master sheet and all this? Here's where the scary part comes in. What happened one day, one of the users were working in the sheet, and actually they're working in a different Excel sheet. And by a click of the button, they were faced with do you want to replace the existing file? Now, I'm sure all of you out there, when you're working with Excel, when you're saving a document and you get those little warnings, I'm sure you read every letter of that sentence, right? Well, probably not. You're just going to click OK. And what happened was that whole spreadsheet got overwritten by another sheet. Now, they had some other IT issues as well. So retrieving that from a backup was problematic, and that's a whole other issue. So they ended up taking weeks of going through old emails, other spreadsheets to rebuild that data, and it was kind of a scary thing. Now, the good news is, because of that, we've now rebuilt this using Power Apps and the Common Data Service. The data is now backed up. It's audited. Multiple people can work on it. We have great reporting, and they're now much more efficient because some of the workflows and things like that. So that's part of that evolution of that business app. One more scary story. So there's some extended family of mine who are, belong to a local church, kind of a community-based church. And now a lot of these churches and other religious organizations, they really rely on their membership to pay dues and fees and things like that. So this church, they were like, okay, we need to do this. We need to move into the digital age. And they had an Access application written for that. And that's not too bad. I have nothing against Access. But this was like 15 years ago. That Access application is still running. It's running on one of these. It's an actual computer with a CRT monitor. It's a desktop. It still runs. It's still running. But here's the other part. Guess where that data is being backed up? Yes, they are doing backups. It's still being backed up on floppy disks. Now, this is another great situation for, maybe moving to the cloud and getting onto a more modern business app. Because what's going to happen, and it hasn't happened, but what could happen is, boom, what would happen if those buildings were destroyed? And even from the backups, if those backups are on site, how are you going to find a computer that's going to read a floppy disk? So again, these are reasons why you should have a proper business app. So what's the solution to that? Well, there is the low code, no code, cloud-based platforms. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of Microsoft. We are talking about Dynamics today. So there is the Microsoft Power Platform, but there are others out there. And the reason being why it's better than an Excel sheet or an Access database is we have all those things we talked about earlier, the multi-user, the web basis, security, reporting integration, all of those great features to make this much more efficient. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, they're going, that's great, but aren't we back to that building an application again? Because we're back to that developer. So who is going to build this Power App for us? Is it still going to be that developer that's going to disappear off to Alaska? Is it, are we going to be, reliant on other people? Now, you might be, you bring in the right skills, but what's really cool about the Power Platform is who can build these Power Apps? Anybody can build Power Apps. Anybody, it does require a little bit of technical skill. Looking at, my parents, I don't think my dad could ever do one, but I think I could get my mom to do one. So with the Power Apps, you could actually build a lot of things pretty simply. And I'm going to prove it to you because we're going to pop into a demo and we're going to build a CRM app using the Power Platform. And I'm going to show you, and this is, like I said, we're only in a 40-minute session here. I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is. So we have a few requirements. We're going to need to track things like accounts, contacts, activities, and donations. We want it easy to use. We want to do things like export it to Excel and tie into other things. And maybe we want to do something like send an email alert to finance. So I'm going to pop out to my Power Platform. So here I am. I'm in my Power Apps. And now you can actually go and sign in and get a community version of this. So you could actually try to play with this today. And we'll talk a little bit where to get started or a little bit later on. So I'm in my environment. And what I'm going to do is I want to create that CRM application. So first thing I'm going to do is create a solution. All the solution is, it's just a bucket. I'm just going to call this CRM to hold all these assets we're going to build. I'm going to choose a publisher. I have my Ready XRM already here, and I can do some versioning. So, there's a lot of other little things here that we can do. So we have our solution, which is empty right now, our CRM solution. And so what we're going to do, no components yet, not a problem. Now, remember our requirements. We wanted to trace things or track things like accounts, which are companies and contacts. So if we were building this from ground up, or if we were a developer, we'd go into SQL, maybe start making those tables, being to draw it out. But this is the cool part about the Power Platform, and specifically the Common Data Service. Now, I'm not so much talking about the Common Data Service today, but the Common Data Service is built on something called the Common Data Model, which means that Microsoft has already done a lot of legwork and created a lot of those common entities that you would use in your business application. So instead of creating a new one, I'm going to add an existing one. And I'm going to add an existing entity. And I'm going to choose account. And I'm going to search for contact here. Here's my contact. And I think, whoops, I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to add my entities. I'm going to choose account. Scroll down, choose contact, and maybe I'm going to track activities as well. So you'll see here that there's a whole bunch of entities as part of the common data model that we could choose. So we don't necessarily have to be reinventing the wheel all the time. I'm just going to hit next. I can choose to include components, but we don't need to worry about that now. So we've added those components. So that's great. But remember, we also want to track donations. So what I'm going to do here is I could look in my common data model and try to find a donation entity, or even someone else might have created one that we could load in. But for now, let's just create a brand new one. I'm going to create a new entity, and we're going to call it contributions, just to be a little bit different. Contribution. And this is going to be an entity, or for those who know databases, it's going to be a table. And we're going to use it to track the contributions that people would be giving as part of this CRM app that we're creating. I'm just going to change the display name to contribution number. And we'll just hit done here. And then we're going to add some other fields, because remember, we want to track certain things. So I want to track who the contributor is. So I could just use a text field, but I'm just going to choose something called a lookup. And I'm going to link that to the other entity. So I'm going to link that to my contact. And we'll just ignore that. And we'll hit done. And I'm going to add a couple other things. Let's add the contribution amount, which would be we're going to make that a currency field. And again, Power Platform has multi-currency built in, so we don't even need to worry about that with exchange rates and things like that. There's some more work, but that's sort of a project for another day. And then I'll just add something like the contribution date. All right, and we'll just pick the date only. We're done. Excellent. So I'm going to save that entity. And I'm just going to change one last thing because we want to have that contribution number to track sort of like a serialized approach. So I'm just going to go into this number here, going to do that, and we're going to change that to an auto number field. And we won't make it required. We'll make it optional because whole other story. And we'll just start out with CPR as our contribution. We'll start at number 1000. Pretty easy. Save that entity. So already you see my app coming along, and I've only spent maybe 5 minutes on this. So we want to make sure we're moving along. So I'm going to go on my form here, and already part of the Power Platform has created those assets like forms. So we have this basic form. Of course, these are just some little quirks with the Power Platform. I'm just going to sign in there. And so what we're going to do here is on my form, it's already created. Now, it's probably a little bit hard to see on this. So let me see if I can try to make that a little bit bigger for you. There we go. I'm going to add my field like my contribution amount, my contribution date, and my contributor. And what I'll also do is I'll just move my owner up into my header field here. And that really just ties to the user using the system. That's it. We'll just save that. And we'll publish. And what that's doing, it's saving all that configuration to the cloud. We'll go back here. So already our app's definitely coming along. And then I'm just going to go in and I can modify something with the view. So here are my active contributions, and the view is what we're going to see, sort of a list of things. So I can just add things like my contribution amount, my contribution date. I'll just realign that a little bit. And so far, if you've noticed, I've been using my mouse. I haven't been using my keyboard all that much. I haven't been going into any deep code. And I'm building a business application. Like, I don't know. To me, this is really cool stuff. And I'm hoping you find it cool too. So I'm just going to publish that view. And of course, it's just going to take a few minutes to go there. Let's go back in our solution. So we've now modified this a little bit. So let's just sort of finish this off and create our app. So I'm going to go back into my CRM solution here. And here I'm actually going to create an app. Now I have the choice to create a Canvas app or a model-driven app. I'm going to create a model-driven app today because that already has that predefined structure based on your database. Whereas a Canvas app, you can begin to draw and things like that. And I know there's other sessions as part of DynamicsCon that are building Canvas apps. So definitely check those out. So I'm going to go into my model-driven app here. I'm going to call this CRM. I'm going to leave it the default image. Of course, I would put a full description here. I'm going to use an existing solution because we've already created that solution, our CRM solution, which is the bucket that holds all these assets. I'm just going to hit done here, and it's going to begin to create my app. So notice it added my entities here. So the last thing I need to do is modify my sitemap. So in this area, I'm in my sitemap now, which is that navigation as part of our application. I'm going to call this contribution app. Or I'm just going to call it CRM. And I'll create a new group, and I'll make that group my stakeholders. So I'm creating my groups here. I'm going to create a new sub area, and that's going to be an entity. And I'm just going to choose things like account, and I'm going to add an other sub area. And definitely follow along at home if you'd like. That's the cool thing about doing these virtual sessions. You can actually try this stuff on your own, you know. And my stakeholders. So let's just go in and add another group here, and we'll just call this group, fundraising. And we're going to add, and here I'm going to add a sub area. And I'm just going to add the last thing, which is going to be my contribution, which is that custom entity that we created. Here it is. Cool. We'll hit save. We'll publish that. And I'm not sure if anybody's been keeping a timer at home. I'll just save and close this. I'm going to save this app. I'm going to publish it. And I'm going to play. So here we go. We have our CRM app. It's coming up. I don't have any of my active accounts. I should have some accounts in here. Here we go. So it did have some sample data loaded in my common data service already. But here, for anybody who's seen Dynamics 365 before, this should be very familiar. It's an actual, but we have an actual CRM app. We have things like accounts. We have things like contacts. I can sort of change some of my views here to see a bunch of different active contacts. And of course, we have our contributions. And I can go in and begin to add contributions. So I'm going to put in a contribution. Let's see who the contributor is. And we see like all of these things like the lookups, the user interface. It's already been created for us. We don't need to worry about that kind of thing. And I can just go in, put in a date for today. I'm just going to hit save. It did my auto number for me and all of these other things. So I can go in my contributions. I can export to Excel. It goes to show you that this is just as easy as building an Excel app, but the data's in the cloud. There's a security model. There's security rules. Now, if you're going to build a real project on this, obviously you'd want to plan it out a little better, probably get some user testing. But you can see here that, like going back to that business earlier that wanted to go out and buy and procure a CRM, very quickly we could achieve what their requirements were using a Power App. And exactly what I did, and we worked with them and their team internally, built the Power Apps. I actually didn't do much hands-on work. It was more sort of advisory. And it's really cool that they could build these CRM apps. Now, I did say I would, talk about automation a little bit. I think I'm running a little short on time today, but here's some homework if you guys want to do this yourself. Within the solution itself, I can actually go and create a new flow. And this will create a brand new, using Power Automate, but a flow that works within the context of your app. So I could just create this on a trigger when every time a contribution is record using something like Common Data Service trigger, it's going to send an email to someone in the organization to let them know that contribution is. So definitely do that at home. Let me know how it works out if you're stuck or something. But really what we've done here is we've gone through and we've built that CRM app. So I'm going to pop back now to my presentation. So we've built our app and, we can track our contributions. We've used the account, we use the contact. It's part of the common data model. But then sometimes as you grow, as your organization grows, you might realize, you know what, those apps look great. And don't get me wrong, there's probably lots we could do there, but maybe we do need a Microsoft 365. Maybe we need some of those features. So again, with Microsoft, you have those features that are part of that 365 Microsoft Dynamics 365 license. Things like, sales, to track opportunities, to track deals, to track your pipelines, your forecasts. What are your customers? What are they interested in buying? There's also marketing. How are you going to reach out to those customers? Let them know of your new products and services. And of course, once they buy, then for service. Now, I think all of you have had those horrendous customer service stories. For me, when I have a great customer service experience, and I do have those, I always ask what system they're using because I'm always curious if they're using Dynamics 365 customer service. And sometimes they are, and it's really cool to hear that they're using the systems and they're giving you great customer service. Of course, there is the evolution. There's the finance, the operations, the commerce from the supply chain management side. There's human resource. And of course, Microsoft has a zillion things called insights. So you have all this data and you can begin to predict things and work with other things like AI, using Flow and all these other parts. Now, if your business doesn't quite fit any of these categories, there's still other options. So one thing that Microsoft has done is they've created these things called accelerators. What an accelerator is, it's an actual Power App built on the Power Platform for things like, and here are the accelerators they have now, and I know that they're adding other ones. There's things like automotive, there's financial services, there's healthcare, there's education, nonprofit, manufacturing, media communications, and I believe that there's more coming. And what you can see is they've actually built a lot of these apps. Not only that, you don't have to use those apps as they stand. You could begin to manipulate that and fit that to your business. So if you're a car dealer, you could take this and go, yeah, but we do things a little bit differently, and begin to make and change what Microsoft did. So this is actually another really cool initiative from Microsoft. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today, I'm not going to spend a ton of time because I do want to have some time for questions, is something currently called Project Oakdale. Now, this is probably going to be renamed in the next few weeks, but what it is you're building these Power Apps, the same as that I showed you today, but you're building it with the context of Microsoft Teams. So what's happened over this past year and here in 2020 is, of course, a lot of people are, because of the current pandemic, people are working from home and working with the context of Teams. Now, there's a lot of organizations that I've worked with have never even looked at Teams before, but now they're in deep with Teams. They're doing everything on Teams. So what Project Oakdale provides is that whole, Power Platform within the context of Teams. And it has something like the Common Data Service. There is, and what you can get is a lighter version of that. And it's actually going to be included as part of Teams licenses, which is really exciting. So you might not even need to, for your internal CRM system, you might not need Dynamics 365. You might not need this full-fledged Power App. You might be able to build your CRM system completely within Teams. And now this is currently in preview, so I really can't show you. This is a screenshot I got from Microsoft's site. They're kind of still evaluating things. It will be in a public preview in a few weeks, and hopefully in your hands, you can work in your companies very soon. So where do you get started with all this? Well, there's a lot of places, there's a lot of resources. Of course, being part of DynamicsCon these 2 days, you're going to learn a lot from a lot of great presenters. But you could always go to, I think Microsoft Learn has done a great job where you can get started. So if you know nothing about Power Apps, you can go in and begin to build out those Power Apps. It also will tell you how you get your own community edition, meaning it's a free version of Power Apps. It's not meant for production. It's there for you to learn and experiment. And I highly recommend you do that. The best way to learn this is to build some apps, like even build like an app to keep track of what's in your refrigerator, or build an app to keep track of your workouts. And from those skills, you're going to be able to take that and apply that to your business. So you don't need to be a developer. If you're just a little bit technical and like playing with things, you can build some pretty cool apps. And I want you to become an app superhero. So, I'm a superhero, and I'm with my sidekick here. And just, some things to think about. Power Platform, it's not new. It's evolved over 17 years. It's not new technology. It has a history. It's robust. It's a proven track record. I think it's also important to understand the business requirements. Now, today I went in and I created an app sort of on the fly, but to be successful, you really should evaluate your business requirements. Make sure you list them out. Make sure you engage people that are going to be using the app, because they're the ones that are going to be, they're going to be the ones using it, and they can provide the best feedback. And realize all technology is a tool, so don't be beholden to it. It's meant to help you along. It's not meant to add extra administration or for the sake of using it. So always make sure that it's meant to help you do your job. Also, it's an investment. And we didn't talk too much about licensing today, but just to, licensing is, if you have the Power Apps, there are ways to do the licensing, but it's an investment. And I've also heard, I don't know the exact price list in front of me, but a lot of organizations or people I've talked to go, oh yeah, but Power Apps is so expensive. But here's the thing, if you consider, my kind of response back is like, well, it's not that expensive compared to some other systems, but how much are you spending on coffee for your employees? And your like if you buy coffee, if you supply a coffee, if you have a coffee maker in your kitchen, how much is that costing you? It's probably costing you probably $1 or $2 per employee per day. Well, that's roughly what a Power App will cost. So when you think about it this way, it's a good investment in order to get more efficiencies, and definitely will save you money or save you time or save you a lot of hassle. And it's building apps is accessible. You don't need those geeky developers. And I should say you do need the geeky developers for those edge cases, but get them working on those edge cases. All that other foundational stuff, this is where you are, I would call that, not so much professional developers, but application developers. I've also heard the term citizen developers. You could have the people focused on that and have your professional developers do that hardcore, those edge cases, those things that are really off the charts, because that's the work the developers love to do. And you also consider those first party apps like the Dynamics 365. So don't go out there and rebuild a sales app if you have a complex sales management. Get Dynamics 365 and use those Power App skills to modify and kind of fit to that. Also take a look at those accelerators, because there might be a lot of good pieces that you can take from that and build your own application. And I want you to become a Power Platform superhero with this. All right. Thank you everyone again for joining my session today on DynamicsCon. It's been a pretty exciting conference so far. And, definitely hope you learned something from this. And I'd be excited to hear about your journeys building, your own business applications using the Power Platform or even Dynamics 365.